This story is titled, Mom and Dad Made My Disabled Sister Their Golden Child, giving her everything while ignoring my development dreams, then forced me to pack my things and kicked me out. But I didn't give up and became successful. Now, years later, they're begging for forgiveness and financial help. Hey Reddit, my name is Marcus. I'm 25 years old, and I'm the only son in my family. I have one younger sister named Elena who is deaf, and that single fact shaped every aspect of my childhood in ways I'm still processing today. From the moment my parents discovered Elena's hearing loss, she became the golden child who could do no wrong, while I faded into the background like furniture they'd grown tired of looking at. The final insult came when they drained every single cent of my college fund that my grandfather had left specifically for my education. They used it to pay for Elena's specialized schooling, then had the audacity to tell me I should just take out loans like everyone else. That was the moment I realized I meant nothing to them, so I left and built my life from scratch without their help. After 4 years of complete silence between us, I got an unexpected call from my dear old mother inviting me to dinner. Here's exactly how that conversation went, and why it was so satisfying to watch them squirm. I grew up in Nebraska, where my dad worked in sales for a manufacturing company that made industrial equipment nobody thinks about until it breaks down. He brought in decent money, but nothing spectacular. Enough for us to afford a 4-bedroom house with outdated appliances and a 2-car garage that could barely fit our aging Honda sedans. My mom managed the day-to-day operations for a small law office downtown that handled corporate law for 3 attorneys. She wore the same 6 outfits on rotation and complained more about her boss's coffee habits than she ever talked to me about anything meaningful. On paper, we looked like your standard middle-class American family, complete with a mortgage, 2 kids, and a golden retriever named Rex. Rex was honestly the only family member who showed genuine enthusiasm when I walked into a room. I was always the quiet kid who flew under the radar academically, pulling B's and C's without ever opening a textbook. I was decent at football, but never quite good enough to earn a starting position, so I spent most of my free time gaming on a secondhand PC that I gradually upgraded with parts I bought, using money from mowing lawns and shoveling snow during Nebraska winters. My gaming rig was essentially a Frankenstein monster that somehow managed to function despite all odds. The case came from a yard sale, the graphics card from eBay, and I had RAM sticks from 4 different manufacturers that probably shouldn't have worked together but did. I kept that machine running through sheer determination and countless hours of troubleshooting, teaching myself basic programming through YouTube tutorials and free online courses because nobody else was going to bother teaching me anything useful. Nothing about me demanded attention from my parents, which became the defining characteristic of my entire childhood. I learned to cook my own meals by the time I was 13 because Mom was always too busy driving Elena to various appointments to worry about making dinner for the family. I figured out how to do my own laundry because my sports uniforms would sit in the hamper for a week otherwise, and nobody seemed to notice or care that I was walking around in dirty clothes. The breaking point that really showed me where I stood in the family hierarchy happened when I broke my arm falling off my bike. I sat alone in the emergency room waiting area for 4 solid hours because Dad was at Elena's speech therapy session and couldn't leave her there. My arm was clearly broken. You could see the bone protruding at an unnatural angle. But Elena's therapy appointment took priority over their son's medical emergency. That's when I realized I was truly on my own in this family. My sister Elena is 2 years younger than me and was born deaf. When my parents discovered her hearing loss at her 4-month checkup, it was like someone flipped a switch in our house and suddenly everything revolved around Elena's disability. My existence became nothing more than a footnote in the family narrative, always prefaced with instructions to accommodate Elena's needs. Keep it down, Marcus. Elena needs to rest. We can't afford new sneakers this month, Marcus. Elena's specialist appointment was expensive. Every conversation, every decision, every dollar spent was filtered through the lens of what Elena needed. Our neighborhood was the definition of cookie-cutter boring, but my buddy Tyler from across the street kept me sane during those years. We met in 3rd grade when his family moved into the house directly across from ours, and by 4th grade, he was practically living at our house. Or more accurately, hanging out in the garage with me while my parents focused all their attention on Elena. Tyler's family wasn't wealthy either, but his parents at least remembered that he existed as an individual person with his own needs and interests. His dad actually taught us both how to change a tire when we turned 15, sharing practical life skills that my own father never bothered to pass along to me. Tyler and I built my first real gaming rig together when I was 15. spending an entire weekend putting it together after sourcing parts from Craigslist and various discount sites. We scored a decent CPU when the local community college upgraded their computer lab and were practically giving away their old equipment. Tyler's older cousin hooked us up with a graphics card that was obsolete for his CAD work, but absolutely perfect for our gaming needs. The whole process took us forever because we were learning as we went, but it was incredibly satisfying to see everything come together. What really drove home how little my parents paid attention to my life was that they didn't even notice I had assembled a completely new computer for almost 3 weeks. 3 weeks of me using a different machine with better performance, and neither of them bothered to look closely enough at what I was doing to realize anything had changed. When Dad finally did notice, his only comment was asking if I'd wasted money on that video game junk again. He never bothered to acknowledge that I was teaching myself a marketable skill that would eventually save my ass and provide my entire career foundation. The favoritism in our house wasn't just subtle hints or slightly different treatment. It was blatant enough that even my teachers started to notice the disparity. When I joined the football team in 6th grade, my parents managed to show up to exactly 3 games during the entire season. The first one, the championship game that we lost, and 1 random game in the middle of the season. Meanwhile, when Elena started playing in a deaf volleyball league during 8th grade, they never missed a single match. They would reschedule work commitments, cancel other plans, and even call in sick sometimes just to make sure they could attend every single one of her games. The message couldn't have been clearer if they had spelled it out in neon letters. Her activities mattered, mine didn't. This pattern extended to every aspect of our lives, including our living space. During finals week of my junior year, they actually moved my entire gaming setup out to the garage so Elena could use my bedroom as her study space. Their reasoning was that she needed a quiet environment to focus on her studies. The irony of a deaf person needing a quiet environment was completely lost on them, but I wasn't about to point that out and make the situation worse. Tyler helped me move everything to the garage, watching this whole ridiculous scene play out with growing disbelief. "Dude, your parents play favorites so hard it's embarrassing," he told me afterward. And he wasn't wrong. My mom would spend hours every evening helping Elena with her homework, researching the best learning techniques specifically designed for deaf students, taking sign language classes to communicate better with her, and driving her to specialized programs that were sometimes located clear across the state. When I needed help with anything, "Figure it out yourself, Marcus. You need to learn independence." That was basically code for, "We don't have time or energy left for you after dealing with Elena's needs." Now don't get me wrong here. I want to be absolutely clear that I liked my sister Elena as a person. Elena was never the villain in this story, and she didn't ask for any of this preferential treatment or to be used as a weapon against me. She was just a kid like me, trying to navigate her own challenges and circumstances. Elena was actually smart, determined, and honestly pretty funny when she wanted to be. She had a sharp wit and could make me laugh even during some of the more tense family moments. The real problem was never Elena herself. It was how my parents weaponized her needs against me at every opportunity. They used her disability as a convenient excuse to give her everything while simultaneously giving me nothing, when the reality is that they absolutely could have supported both of us if they had wanted to. Instead, they created this false zero-sum game where any resources spent on me were somehow being stolen from Elena, which was complete bullshit designed to justify their obvious favoritism. During my senior year of high school, I managed to get my first real job at a local electronics store. The pay was absolutely garbage, barely above minimum wage. But the employee discount allowed me to upgrade my computer rig for cheap, which was incredibly valuable to me. More importantly, this job gave me access to money that wasn't controlled or monitored by my parents for the first time in my life. I stashed every single cent I could manage into a savings account that Tyler's mom helped me open, though the amount seemed pathetically small compared to what I knew I'd need for college expenses. The one adult in my family who actually saw me as a person worth investing in was my grandfather on my dad's side. Grandpa Frank had worked construction his entire life and had literally built his own house with his bare hands back in the 1980s. He had the calloused, weathered hands to prove it, and he'd take me fishing at this little lake about an hour outside of town. During these trips, he taught me practical skills like how to change the oil in a car and fix a leaky faucet. All those essential life skills that my dad never bothered to share with me. Most importantly, Grandpa Frank actually listened when I talked about my dreams of designing video games someday. He didn't dismiss it as a waste of time like my parents constantly did. "You've got a good head for problem solving, Marcus," he'd tell me while we sat waiting for fish to bite. His tackle box organized with a precision that would make Marie Kondo proud. "Those games you're always playing. They're built by people not much different from you. There's no reason you couldn't do that too if you put your mind to it." Every Christmas, Grandpa Frank would slip me a $60 bill when nobody else was looking. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was reliably the only gift I'd received that wasn't socks or some generic t-shirt from the clearance rack. More than once, I caught him having heated arguments with my dad about how they treated me. "The boy needs support, John, not just a roof over his head," I overheard him say, once before Dad changed the subject and walked away. When Grandpa Frank died during my junior year from sudden heart failure, I felt like I'd lost my only real advocate and ally in the entire family. What I didn't expect was what came next after Grandpa Frank's funeral. At the will reading, everyone in the family was absolutely shocked when the lawyer announced, "To my grandson Marcus, I leave $75,000 in a trust fund designated specifically for his college education." My parents' faces went through an incredible transformation in the span of about 6 seconds, from grief to shock to something that looked almost like resentment. For once in my life, I actually had a clear path forward that wasn't completely dependent on my parents' whims or their obvious lack of interest in my future. With that money, a computer science degree at State University was suddenly within reach, without me having to take on crushing student loan debt. The program there had strong connections to several gaming studios for internships, and I could finally pursue my dream of working in game development. There was just one catch that I should have paid more attention to. The trust named my parents as the trustees. At the time, I thought this was just a legal formality since I was still a minor. I never imagined in my wildest nightmares that they would stoop so low as to steal money that was explicitly left for me by their own father. Looking back now, I realize I was a complete idiot for not seeing the warning signs that were practically flashing in neon. I spent my entire senior year researching computer science programs and focusing specifically on schools with strong game development tracks. When I got accepted to the State University's computer science program, which had exactly the kind of industry connections I needed, I was over the moon with excitement. When I told my parents about my acceptance, Dad just grunted and said we'd talk about finances later. I thought he was just being his usual distant, uninterested self rather than planning to destroy my future. A week before my high school graduation, my parents invited my Aunt Linda and her husband over for dinner. Aunt Linda is my dad's sister, and I thought this would be the perfect time to discuss my college plans with the extended family present. I'd already been accepted to the program, had potential roommate options lined up, and just needed to send in the housing deposit by the following Tuesday. I remember actually ironing my one decent button-up shirt for the occasion, thinking this was finally when things would turn around for me and my parents would show some pride in my achievements. God, what an idiot I was. "We need to discuss your college situation," my dad said, putting down his fork halfway through what was already a particularly awkward dinner. "Yeah, I already got the housing forms," I replied, thinking this conversation was finally happening the way it should. "I just need to send the deposit by next Tuesday." My mom looked at my dad, who cleared his throat and delivered the line that would completely end our relationship forever. "Yeah, about that," he said in the coldest voice I'd ever heard from him. "We had to use that money for Elena's special education programs and to set up her college fund instead." The entire table went silent. I felt like someone had replaced all the blood in my veins with ice water, and my world collapsed in real time. "You did what?" I managed to say, trying to process what I was hearing. "That was my money. Grandpa left it specifically for me." My dad looked at me like I was discussing a minor business transaction rather than him stealing his own son's future. "The trust gave us discretion as trustees," he said coldly. "Elena's education at Brighton Academy for the Deaf gives her better opportunities than you'd get at a regular college. You can just get loans for community college like everyone else." Aunt Linda looked like someone had just hit her with a Windows XP error screen. "You spent it all, John?" she asked in disbelief. "Your father specifically left that money for Marcus's education." "Elena needed it more," my mom snapped back, showing more genuine emotion defending their decision to steal from me than she'd shown toward me in years. "Do you know how expensive deaf education is? Marcus is perfectly capable of supporting himself." That was the moment I realized exactly who these people really were. "You're not parents," I said, standing up from the table. "You're investors who decided early on that I wasn't worth the effort. Well, congratulations. You've officially lost me as a son." I walked out of that dining room, went straight to my bedroom, and packed everything I could possibly fit into my car. I could hear arguing downstairs between my parents and Aunt Linda, but I couldn't make out the words over the ringing in my ears and the sound of my own heartbeat. I did a final sweep of my room, making sure to grab my external hard drives that contained all my programming projects and personal files. Those drives represented years of work and learning that nobody could take away from me. Then, I walked out of that house without saying another word to either of my parents. I knew I was never coming back. Tyler's place was only a few blocks away, so I didn't even have to call ahead. One look at my face when he opened the door, and he just stepped aside to let me in. "They did it, didn't they?" he asked quietly. I just nodded, and he immediately helped me carry my stuff inside without asking any questions. 2 days later, I got a weird text from Elena that just said, "I didn't know. I'm sorry." That was it. No follow-up, no explanation. I didn't reply, but those words stuck with me for a long time. Tyler and his girlfriend Jessica let me crash on their couch without any hesitation whatsoever. Their apartment wasn't big, just a one-bedroom with barely enough space for the two of them, let alone a third wheel who was carrying emotional baggage and had nowhere else to go. But they treated me like family when my own blood relatives couldn't be bothered to care. "Stay as long as you need, man," Tyler told me that first night. "We'll figure it out together." The texts from my parents started rolling in the very next day. "Mom, you're being dramatic as usual. Come home and we'll discuss this like adults." "Dad, man up and accept reality. Your sister needs this more than you do." Then the messages escalated into something much more vicious. "This is why we never thought you'd succeed in college anyway. You've always been the weak one who gives up when things get tough." That last text was all I needed to see. I blocked both of their numbers and focused entirely on survival. Tyler's parents stepped up in ways that my own parents never had. They helped me get my paperwork in order so I could apply for financial aid as an independent student. They didn't have money to spare, but they showed me how to navigate the bureaucratic system, apply for grants, and file my FAFSA properly. Tyler's dad even took me to the bank to open an account that my parents couldn't access or control. They helped me work through all the logistics of being completely on my own at 19 years old. They even helped me retrieve my birth certificate and social security card, which I had left behind in my rush to get out of that house. I needed to make money fast, so I applied to every retail and food service job within walking distance of Tyler's place. Unfortunately, nothing came through right away, and I was starting to panic about my financial situation. That's when Tyler's mom connected me with her brother, who managed a warehouse that desperately needed temporary workers. The pay was absolutely garbage, only $11 an hour, but it involved loading trucks in a non-air-conditioned building during the peak of summer. It was something, though, and I couldn't afford to be picky. I spent my days lifting heavy boxes in 98-degree heat, coming home so drenched in sweat that Tyler made me strip down in the hallway before entering their apartment. The work was backbreaking and soul-crushing, but it kept me fed and gave me just enough money to start planning for my future. Every night I'd collapse on their couch, physically exhausted but mentally planning my next moves. My parents' final text came through my aunt's phone since I had blocked their numbers. "Don't come back crying for help when you lose everything, loser." I took a screenshot of that message and made it my phone's wallpaper for the next 4 years. Every time I felt like giving up or thought maybe I was making a mistake, I'd look at that message and think, "I'll show them who the real loser is." Aunt Linda reached out separately to apologize for what had happened at that dinner. "Your dad and I had a huge fight after you left," she told me over the phone. "What they did was wrong, and I told him exactly that. I wish I could help you financially, but we're already stretched thin with my own kids' college expenses." She became my only source of information about the family over the next few years, giving me occasional updates that I wasn't sure I wanted to hear, but somehow needed to know. The first month of independence was absolutely brutal in every possible way. I was sleeping on a couch, working 11-hour shifts at the warehouse in oppressive heat, and trying to figure out how I could possibly afford even community college classes. My car broke down again, forcing me to rely on the city's pathetic public transit system, which added an extra hour each way to my commute. I'd often wait 50 minutes for a bus that was supposed to come every 20 minutes. I was exhausted, angry, and starting to think that maybe my parents were right about me being a loser who would never amount to anything. My diet during this period consisted of whatever was cheapest at the grocery store, which meant I got pretty good at cooking eggs about a dozen different ways. Protein was essential for the physical demands of my job, and eggs were the most affordable option available. I kept a detailed spreadsheet tracking every penny I spent, color-coded by necessity level. It was depressing to see how little money I had, but it helped me stay disciplined about my spending. Everything changed when Tyler's cousin Derek entered the picture. Derek worked at a small indie game studio about 40 minutes away and mentioned over pizza at Tyler's place that they desperately needed quality assurance testers. "It's only $13 an hour to play broken games and document bugs," he explained. "The pay is still shit, but the experience is absolute gold if you want to get into game development." I interviewed the very next day. The game studio was basically a converted warehouse space with about 18 people working on 3 different game projects simultaneously. The office was held together by duct tape, determination, and an alarming amount of caffeine. Everything was secondhand. They had exercise balls instead of proper office chairs and a coffee machine that looked like it predated YouTube. The founders were ex-EA developers who had gotten completely burned out on triple-A crunch culture and wanted to build their own thing where creativity mattered more than corporate politics. They hired me on the spot when I mentioned that I had taught myself basic C++ programming and had built simple games as personal projects. The tech lead actually pulled up my GitHub profile during the interview, which caught me completely off guard since I didn't even know anyone actually looked at those repositories. Seeing someone take my self-taught skills seriously for the first time was incredibly validating after years of my parents dismissing my interests as worthless. I enrolled in community college part-time, taking night classes in computer science while working days at the studio. Sleep became a luxury that I couldn't afford. I'd get home around 11:30 p.m. after evening classes, then code personal projects until 3:30 a.m., crash for a few hours, and do it all over again. The warehouse job had been physically exhausting, but this new schedule was mentally draining in a completely different way. I went through energy drinks like water, and my morning routine became a shower, 3 scrambled eggs, and enough caffeine to make my eyeballs vibrate. After 3 months of crashing on Tyler's couch, I finally found a studio apartment that I could actually afford on my game tester salary. Studio was honestly being generous. It was basically a converted garage with a bathroom attached. The place had roaches, black mold in the bathroom that the landlord absolutely refused to address, and neighbors who fought loud enough to wake the dead at 3 a.m. But I made every single rent payment on time, which felt like a massive accomplishment. I furnished the entire place with items from Goodwill, Facebook Marketplace, and occasionally just things I found on the curb during garbage day. My bed was literally a mattress on the floor. My desk was an old door laid across 2 filing cabinets I'd rescued from a dumpster, and my kitchen table was a plastic storage bin turned upside down. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and nobody could take it away from me or give it to their favorite child. 7 months into this new life, Tyler had an idea that would completely change everything for both of us. We were hanging out in my depressing apartment on a rare night when I wasn't coding or studying, playing the latest Call of Duty update. Tyler's character had just been sniped while doing his signature move of running in straight lines across open fields, and he was waiting to respawn when he said, "We should start working on our own thing on the side." "With what time?" I replied, feeling overwhelmed just thinking about adding another commitment to my schedule. I'm barely sleeping as it is, but the idea had already taken root in my mind. "We don't need to rush it," Tyler continued. "Weekend warrior style, build something small but polished that could actually get attention in the indie game scene." We set up a shared cloud workspace and started building a demo for a game idea I'd been sketching out during my lunch breaks at the studio. Every Saturday night, we'd pool our cash for pizza and energy drinks, then code until sunrise like caffeinated zombies. Our business meetings happened at the cheapest diner in town, where we'd draft design documents on napkins while eating $5.49 breakfast specials, debate game mechanics over endless coffee refills, and sketch character concepts on the backs of receipts. 4 months into development, Derek introduced us to Amanda, a 3D artist fresh out of art school who was desperately looking for portfolio work to break into the industry. She joined our weekend coding sessions and brought exactly the kind of artistic talent we desperately needed but couldn't afford to hire. Amanda was working as a barista during the day to pay her bills while trying to get her foot in the door somewhere, anywhere, in game development. She was another person with serious potential who just needed someone to give her a chance. Amanda and I butted heads constantly at first, which created some legendary arguments that Tyler often had to mediate. She was completely focused on aesthetics and visual polish, while I was obsessed with making sure the underlying systems actually functioned properly. "Nobody cares if your mechanics are perfect if the game looks like trash," she'd argue passionately. And nobody cares how pretty it looks if it plays like garbage, I'd fire back with equal intensity. Those heated debates actually pushed our project much further than polite agreement ever could have. Our first prototype was honestly garbage, but it was our garbage, and we were proud of it. We showed it to a few of Derek's co-workers at the studio who gave us brutally honest feedback that was hard to hear but absolutely necessary. The movement felt floaty and imprecise, the combat system was completely unsatisfying, and our procedural level generation created way too many dead ends that frustrated players. Instead of getting discouraged by the criticism, we took it as a challenge and rebuilt entire sections from scratch, staying awake for 42 hours straight one weekend to hit a self-imposed deadline that probably didn't matter to anyone but us. The first year of development was absolutely brutal on top of everything else I was already doing. I was working full-time at the studio, taking night classes to finish my degree, and pouring every spare minute into our passion project. There were nights when I literally fell asleep at my keyboard, face first into the keys. My car finally died completely during this period, forcing me to buy a cheap bicycle to get around town. I got caught in the rain so many times that fall that I permanently smelled like wet clothes, but gradually all the pieces started falling into place. I got my associate's degree in computer science and actually made the dean's list despite everything else going on in my life. I leveraged my quality assurance experience to land a junior developer position at the same studio, which came with a pay bump to $46,000 annually. After scraping by for so long on warehouse wages and tester pay, this felt like winning the lottery. Amanda and I had started clicking both professionally and personally. We were both workaholics with industry dreams and absolutely no safety nets to fall back on. We officially started dating 7 months after she joined our development team, keeping things completely professional during work sessions, but spending what little free time we had together. Our first date was actually fixing my apartment's leaky faucet together because I couldn't afford to hire a plumber, and Amanda had watched enough YouTube tutorials to be dangerous with basic plumbing. Somehow, not flooding my apartment became more romantic than any fancy dinner could have been. "You code like someone's chasing you," she told me once, while watching me work through a particularly nasty bug in our game. She wasn't wrong. I was running from the future my parents had planned for me, where I amounted to absolutely nothing. Our project started gaining real traction in indie developer forums, where we created a basic demo that showcased our core gameplay mechanics. We had developed a roguelike with a unique twist on traditional progression systems that people seemed to genuinely enjoy playing. Derek leveraged his industry contacts to get us feedback from professional developers, and while the notes were harsh, they were also incredibly constructive. The feedback focused mainly on our combat system and level generation algorithms, pointing out specific areas where we could improve the player experience. One senior developer from a major studio spent 4 hours on a video call with us, breaking down everything from our animation timing to our user interface flow. It was like getting a masterclass in game design for free, and we took detailed notes on every suggestion. Working out of my cramped apartment became completely impossible as our team expanded and our project grew more complex. So we converted Tyler's garage into a makeshift development studio. Tyler's parents were incredibly supportive of our venture, even running an additional internet line out to the garage so we could have reliable high-speed connectivity. We set up 4 workstations with second-hand monitors and computers that we'd gradually upgraded over time. The walls were decorated with concept art and whiteboards for tracking bugs and feature requests. Our server was literally just a desktop computer sitting under the main desk with a paper sign taped to it that read, "Kick softly when tired." We installed an old window air conditioning unit that made noise like a dying whale, but it kept the temperature just below actual oven levels during the brutal summer months. We hit constant roadblocks throughout the development process that tested our resolve. Our first attempt at securing development funding failed miserably when the investor took one look at our garage operation and decided we weren't serious enough to warrant investment. The game engine we had initially chosen couldn't handle what we were trying to build, forcing us to pivot to a completely different technology stack 7 months into development. Tyler and I had a massive fight about the business direction that nearly ended both the project and our lifelong friendship. He wanted to target casual mobile gamers for quick revenue generation, while I was absolutely adamant about building something with real depth for PC gaming enthusiasts. We didn't speak to each other for 4 solid days, which was the longest we'd gone without talking since we were kids. Finally, Amanda got fed up with our childish behavior and literally locked us in the garage together with a whiteboard, refusing to let us out until we had developed a plan that both of us could live with. Through all the setbacks and arguments, we kept grinding away at the project. I became the designated bug fixer for our team, the guy who could step in when something was fundamentally broken and nobody else could figure out why. I developed an almost supernatural sixth sense for tracking down weird edge cases and memory leaks that would crash the game unexpectedly. My sleep schedule was permanently destroyed, but my debugging skills became legendary within our small team. I transferred to State University to finish my bachelor's degree in computer science, still working full-time and developing our game during every spare moment. It took much longer than the traditional 4-year route, but I was determined to get that degree my grandfather had wanted for me. I actually missed the graduation ceremony because I was fixing a critical bug for our demo build that we needed to submit for a showcase. But the diploma still hangs on my wall as the first thing I see every morning when I wake up. Money remained incredibly tight throughout this entire period, but I managed to move to a slightly better apartment that was closer to campus. It was still bare bones basic, but at least I had faster internet, a more reliable computer setup, and most importantly, I was making measurable progress toward my goals every single day. I even splurged on a desk chair that didn't make my back feel like I'd been hit by a truck, which felt like the absolute height of luxury after 4 years of sitting on a folding chair that belonged in a garage sale. Amanda stood by me through all the late-night coding sessions, the stress-induced breakdowns, and the moments when I genuinely doubted whether any of this was worth the sacrifice. She believed in what we were building even during the times when I didn't have faith in myself. When I almost quit after a major technical setback that required us to rebuild our entire save system, she showed up at my apartment with energy drinks and Chinese takeout. "We're not stopping now," was all she said, and that was enough to get me back to work. By our second year of development, we finally had a working prototype that was actually good enough to show to potential investors and publishers. Tyler had completely transformed from my childhood friend into a legitimate business manager, handling all our paperwork, contracts, and investor pitches, while Derek and I focused on the technical development side. Tyler had discovered he had a natural talent for the business aspects of game development, and he secured us a spot at a small indie game showcase where we could demo our work to actual publishers. The showcase was a turning point for our entire operation. Our booth was literally just a folding table with laptops, but our game managed to stand out among all the other indie projects. A scout from Titan Games, a mid-sized publisher that was known for taking chances on innovative indie projects, spent over an hour playing our demo and asking detailed questions about our development process and future plans. 3 weeks later, we were sitting in an actual conference room negotiating our first real publishing deal. The contract negotiations were incredibly tense because Tyler insisted that we maintain ownership of our intellectual property rights, even when it meant accepting less money up front. It was absolutely the right call, though we didn't fully understand how important that decision would be at the time. We were just a bunch of kids who didn't want some corporation to own the thing we'd poured our hearts into creating. 32 months after we first started working on our project in my dingy apartment, we secured actual funding that would let us quit our day jobs and focus entirely on game development. The contract with Titan Games wasn't massive, just $275,000 to finish development with revenue sharing on the back end. But it was enough to pay ourselves real salaries and move into a legitimate office space. We found a location that wasn't glamorous, but the rent was reasonable. And for the first time ever, we had actual business signage with our company name on it. We hired 3 additional developers with our newfound funding, both recent graduates who were hungry for industry experience and willing to work for slightly below market rates in exchange for equity in our company. Our team of 7 people worked absolutely insane hours, but now we were paying ourselves actual salaries instead of just scraping by on hope and energy drinks. I was making $58,000 annually, which was less than I could have earned elsewhere with my experience and skills, but I owned 35% of our company. The potential upside was definitely worth the temporary financial sacrifice. I moved into an apartment that actually had separate rooms and a dishwasher that worked properly. After years of living in what basically amounted to a large closet, having a real kitchen and a bedroom with a door felt like moving into an absolute mansion. It's funny how your perspective on luxury changes when you've been sleeping on floors and eating ramen noodles for several years straight. The game development process became incredibly intense once we had real funding and deadlines to meet. We rebuilt entire systems from scratch to make them more scalable and professional grade. Amanda reworked every single character model and environment asset to elevate the visual quality to something that could compete with larger studios. I personally rewrote our procedural level generation algorithm 8 different times before it finally felt right and created the kind of varied, engaging experiences we wanted players to have. Our combat system went through so many iterations and overhauls that we joked about having PTSD from playtesting the same scenarios hundreds of times. "If I have to kill that first boss one more time, I'm going to lose my mind," became our team's running joke whenever we were debugging combat mechanics. But all that obsessive attention to detail paid off when we finally had something we were genuinely proud to show the world. Our game launched on Steam 11 months later and completely exceeded everyone's expectations, including our own. We hit the indie game charts within the first week and started generating consistently positive reviews from both players and professional critics. We weren't millionaires overnight, but the revenue stream was steady enough to fund our next project with a much larger scope and budget. We immediately started working on our second title with a significantly bigger team and resources that we could have only dreamed about during our garage development days. Through my Aunt Linda, I occasionally heard updates about my family's situation, and honestly, it was satisfying to watch karma catch up with them. My dad had been laid off at 56 when his company decided that a middle manager with an outdated skill set wasn't worth keeping during their downsizing efforts. They had taken out a second mortgage on their house to help Elena buy a condo after her graduation, completely draining their retirement accounts in the process. Now they were struggling to make ends meet on whatever income they could scrape together. The $75,000 they had stolen from me was long gone, spent on Elena's expensive education and living expenses, and now they were facing the harsh financial consequences of their terrible decisions. It's amazing how quickly things can fall apart when you've made your entire financial strategy dependent on screwing over your own child. Karma really is a bitch sometimes. Amanda and I moved in together, renting a decent apartment in a safe neighborhood where we didn't have to worry about break-ins or neighbors screaming at all hours. For the first time since leaving my parents' house, I had actual furniture that wasn't salvaged from dumpsters or thrift shops. My credit score had completely recovered from the disaster of my early independence years, and I was able to buy a reliable car that didn't break down every few months. I could afford to buy real groceries instead of whatever was marked down in the clearance section. These small luxuries felt absolutely enormous after years of genuine deprivation and financial stress. Our second game performed even better than our first release, with gaming websites and industry publications writing articles about our breakthrough indie studio that had come out of nowhere. We hired 5 more developers to handle the increased workload and expanded scope of our projects. Tyler handled the business side of operations flawlessly, negotiating contracts that gave us complete creative control while securing our financial future for years to come. We were approached by 4 different major publishers about potential acquisition offers, but we turned them all down because we preferred to maintain our independence and creative freedom. The validation felt incredible, though, knowing that the studio we had started in Tyler's garage with leftover pizza and energy drinks was now being actively courted by industry giants who wanted to buy us out for serious money. I bought my first house at 29 years old, a modest 4-bedroom home in a good neighborhood with a dedicated office space where I could work remotely when needed. Amanda moved in with me and completely transformed it from just a house into a real home with her artistic eye and attention to detail. My grandfather would have been incredibly proud to see what his investment in me had eventually created, even though it took a much different and more difficult path than he probably ever imagined when he set up that trust fund. We had already made it big in the gaming industry. My parents just didn't know it yet, and I wasn't about to tell them. 4 years after walking out of their house with nothing but my clothes and my computer, my phone rang with a number I had deleted from my contacts but still recognized immediately. It was my mother calling. I almost didn't answer the call, but curiosity won out over my better judgment. "Marcus, it's been such a long time," she said in that fake sweet voice I remembered from childhood. "We miss you so much. Would you be willing to come for dinner this Sunday? Elena will be there too." Against Amanda's advice, I agreed to go. Part of me wanted to show them exactly what they had missed out on by writing me off. Another part of me wanted some kind of closure to this whole mess. Amanda thought it was a mistake to engage with them at all, but she supported my decision to go anyway. "Just remember who you are now," she told me as I was leaving. "Don't let them pull you back into those old toxic patterns." I drove to my childhood home in my new car, immediately noticing how much the property had deteriorated since I'd lived there. The paint was peeling badly. The The lawn was overgrown and patchy, and the whole place looked like it hadn't seen proper maintenance in years. Their financial struggles were written all over the property for anyone to see. The front steps had developed significant cracks. The gutter was hanging loose on one side, and Dad's prized Weber grill that he used to be so proud of was missing from the back deck. My mom gave me an awkward hug at the front door, like she wasn't quite sure how to interact with me anymore. My dad nodded at me from his worn-out recliner, looking noticeably older and thinner than I remembered. The house felt smaller and shabbier than it had in my memories. Elena was already there when I arrived, signing rapidly with our parents, and she gave me a genuine smile when I walked into the room. At least there was that small positive in this whole situation. Dinner consisted of awkward small talk that felt forced and uncomfortable for everyone involved. How's work going? Fine. How's your apartment? It's actually a house now. Nobody seemed to know how to navigate this conversation, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, over coffee and store-brand cookies that tasted like cardboard, my dad cleared his throat in that way that meant he was about to say something important. "Son, we've hit a pretty rough patch financially," he began, and I could see where this was heading from a mile away. "The bank is threatening foreclosure on the house. I've been struggling to find decent work since the layoff, and we thought maybe you could help us out. Just until I can find a new position that pays well enough to get us back on our feet." I took a slow sip of my coffee to hide the smile that was spreading across my face. This was the moment I had been waiting for without even realizing it. "How much are you behind?" I asked, wanting to hear the full extent of their financial disaster. My dad looked relieved that I was asking for specific details instead of immediately saying no. "About $32,000 in back mortgage payments, plus some significant credit card debt we accumulated, helping Elena with her living expenses after graduation." I set down my coffee mug very carefully, wanting to savor this moment that I had been unconsciously waiting for since the day I walked out of their house. "So let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and measured. "You stole $75,000 that my grandfather left specifically for my education. You told me I wasn't worth investing in and that I should just figure everything out on my own. You made me sleep on a friend's couch and work backbreaking warehouse jobs instead of going to college like a normal kid. And now that you're facing the financial consequences of your own terrible decisions, you want me to bail you out?" My mom's face immediately hardened into that defensive expression I remembered so well from childhood arguments. "We raised you," she said, with that entitled tone that suggested I owed them something for doing the bare minimum required by law. "The bare minimum required by law," I cut in before she could continue. "You gave Elena everything she wanted and me absolutely nothing. You made it crystal clear where I stood in this family hierarchy, and now you want my help because you're desperate." To my complete surprise, Elena spoke up from across the table, breaking the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the room. "They're wrong, Marcus," she said clearly, signing and speaking simultaneously so everyone could understand her. "I didn't know about the trust fund until last year when I overheard them arguing about money. They should have never taken what Grandpa left specifically for you." My parents looked absolutely stunned at what they clearly saw as Elena's betrayal of their narrative. Mom started signing something rapidly to Elena, but Elena shook her head firmly and continued speaking. "What they did to you was completely wrong," she said, looking directly at me while she spoke. "I didn't see it when we were growing up because I was just a kid. But looking back now, the favoritism was obvious to everyone except me. I'm genuinely sorry that I was part of it, even unknowingly." I looked directly at my parents and delivered the words I had been rehearsing in my head for years. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said firmly, letting each word sink in. "You made it completely clear where I stood in this family when it mattered. I was the backup plan, the afterthought, the investment that wasn't worth making. Well, now I'm successful despite everything you did to sabotage me, and you're sitting here asking for handouts from the son you wrote off." "We're still your parents," my dad said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice for the first time in this conversation. "Family is supposed to help family when times get tough. Family doesn't steal from family," I replied without missing a beat. "You weren't acting like my family when I actually needed you. Tyler's parents were more like family to me than you ever were. My team at work treats me better than my own blood relatives ever did." I stood up from the table to leave, feeling lighter and more free than I had in years. The weight of seeking their approval or validation was finally lifting off my shoulders completely. Elena followed me to the front door, and I could see that she genuinely wanted to maintain some kind of relationship separate from our toxic parents. I'd like to stay in touch with you, she said quietly, without them being involved in it. I gave her a nod of acknowledgement and walked out of that house for what I knew would be the final time, feeling like I had finally closed a chapter of my life that had been weighing me down for far too long. That confrontation happened 3 years ago, and I haven't regretted walking away for a single moment since then. My parents ended up losing the house to foreclosure, just like they said they would. My dad now works at a hardware store making about a third of his former salary, while my mom found a part-time receptionist position that barely covers their basic expenses. They've sent more desperate messages about medical bills and rent through various flying monkeys, mutual acquaintances, and distant relatives who just happened to mention my parents' financial struggles in casual conversation, hoping I'd feel guilty enough to help them out. I haven't responded to any of these indirect requests for money. Elena visits me every few months, and we're slowly building the sibling relationship that we never had the chance to develop while growing up under our parents' toxic favoritism. It turns out she's actually pretty cool when she's not being used as a weapon against me by our parents. She got a much better job in marketing and is taking additional classes to expand her professional skills. She's building her own independent life, separate from our parents' drama and manipulation. She's even helped us test our games for deaf accessibility features, which has made our products more inclusive and opened up new markets we hadn't considered before. Our studio was acquired last year by one of the major publishers, but we negotiated the deal entirely on our own terms. We maintained guaranteed creative independence and secured significant earn-out payments based on our future performance. We kept our core team completely intact and maintained total control over our development process, conditions that were absolutely non-negotiable for us during the acquisition talks. The corporate executives weren't thrilled about giving us so much autonomy, but our track record of successful releases spoke for itself and gave us serious leverage in negotiations. We're currently working on our third major title with a full development team of 22 people, including 4 other developers who started from similar rock-bottom situations and built their careers from nothing. It's incredibly satisfying to be able to give other people the opportunities that nobody was willing to give me when I was starting out. We're proving that you can build something amazing even when you have to start with absolutely nothing but determination and talent. Amanda and I are expecting our first child, and we found out last month that it's going to be a boy. We've already decided to name him Frank, after my grandfather, who was the only adult in my family who ever believed in my potential and invested in my future. It feels like the perfect way to honor the man who made everything possible, even though he didn't live to see how his faith in me ultimately paid off. After going through this whole experience, I've realized something important about revenge and justice. The real revenge isn't plotting elaborate schemes to hurt the people who wronged you. The real revenge is building a life so successful and fulfilling that their absence improves it rather than diminishes it. It's watching the people who hurt you need something that only you can provide, and then walking away without a second thought. It's proving that their assessment of your worth was completely wrong while they spiral downward due to their own poor choices. Some family cycles are meant to be broken, and I'm proud to be the one who broke this particular cycle of favoritism and financial manipulation. My future children will never have to wonder whether their parents love them or whether they're worth investing in. They'll never have to choose between siblings for resources or attention. Most importantly, they'll never have to build their lives from nothing because their parents decided one child was worth more than another. What would you do if your parents stole your college fund and then asked you for money years later? Was I too harsh, or did they get exactly what they deserved?